Are you tired of dying in Ark, losing all your gear, wasting hours of time, and getting screwed over constantly? If so, you're in the right place. Here's a bunch of info that should prevent 95% of your deaths in-game. Of course, in PvP you'll still die to other players, but dying to the PvE part of the game will be a thing of the past for you after this video. All the stuff I'm showing in this video is how to prevent common ways of dying in Ark, and all of the solutions are very simple, so regardless of how good you are at the game, this should be pretty easy to implement to avoid a lot of common pitfalls. If it helps you out, subscribe to help the channel reach 20k. Thanks! My first tip is to use a box when you're on a platform saddle. What I mean by this is when you go to ride a platform saddle of any creature, for example a racer or a quetzal, build a box of stone or metal structures around where your rider is when you're riding the creature. This is generally in the front middle of the saddle and it keeps you way safer when you're riding these creatures. These boxes are really easy to set up because they only take a couple of structures, and even though they're substantially more important in PvP, it can't hurt to use them in PvE either because it basically protects you from everything in the game. In PvP, there is definitely better designs and different types of designs for different applications, but having at least some sort of box around your character when you're using these creatures in PvP or PvE is just a really nice thing. Another benefit of doing this is if you crash on top of, for example, a quetzal when you're flying on a platform saddle, the box is going to make sure that your crashed body doesn't glitch through the quetzal and fall to the floor. This does happen sometimes if you don't have a pre-built box and you just ride on the platform saddle, and it's just kind of a pain in the ass to wait for the quetzal to go all the way back down to the ground when you whistle for it. So having the box both makes you crash proof and is helpful for both game modes, especially if you look up really good designs for this in PvP for niche situations. My second tip is just leveling up as fast as you physically can until you reach a critical point. The two best ways to level up on any map are either to do a note run, which is generally the best if you have an available note run for your map, or just crafting a ton of cooking pots on the beach after you get one note on double XP. Cooking pots are the most cost-effective to good XP ratio in the early game for crafting, which is why you see a lot of people spam crafting them in the early game when they're trying to get fast XP. You should basically be leveling your character as fast as physically possible until you're at least able to make the saddle for whatever the strongest early game mount is on the map you're playing. You pretty much want to level as fast as possible to get some armor, get a small base down, and get a rideable tame as fast as you physically can whenever you start a new playthrough. This way you'll be able to progress safely and not have to worry about temperature, lack of food, or wild dinos at all. Having any type of tame you can ride is good because they're basically a big meat shield for you, but there are specific tames like I mentioned earlier on every map that are basically impossible to die on when you're in PvE. My next tip is going to go through these early game tames and what's the best to go for on every single map, but definitely focus on leveling up to get a solid set of armor and a good base down at the start. It's by far the most important part of surviving the early game, and it'll prevent so many resets when you lose all your gear and it gets camped by a raptor. On most maps, you want to go for a pteranodon as fast as you can and go around killing carbon, nemesis, and trikes to get the carrots in for the saddle because they're a lot easier to see than the small bugs. For maps like Aberration, you want to get an iguanodon or a ravager. On Genesis 1 and Scorched Earth, you probably want to go for a Procoptodon or maybe a Bloodstalker if you know how to get one. On Lost Island, Genesis 2, and Astraeos, you want to be getting a Maywing or a Mayguana immediately. On Lost Island, getting a Cinemacrops makes it way easier to travel around the map to go get to where Maywings are. But on Genesis 2 and Astraeos, they're really easy to find and they're very easy to tame. Both Procoptodons and Maywings are really easy to tame with billboards. They're both really easy to trap if you just don't hit them before you try to trap them with the billboards. You basically just block their walking path with a billboard and then place two around it. You do need a few pillars and a ceiling to block the Maywing from jumping out of the billboards, but if you trap them in billboards, both of these are really easy to tame. Pteranodons are even easier because you can bola it and shoot it in the crest of its head to do ridiculously high torpor amounts to it. If you shoot it right here where you can see the circle is on screen, you can knock it out in 1 to 3 shots with any type of bow. Iguanodons are also easy because you can also bola those. You can also bola Ravagers, but they're a lot more difficult to knock out comparatively because they're in dangerous packs. And they're tougher to knock out because they have higher torpor, so it's pretty tough to knock them out in the 30 seconds the bola is on them if you don't have above average weapons. On screen now you can see the saddle level requirements and the cost for every single saddle, as well as the type of food and the amount of narcotics you're going to need to tame all of these creatures. Basically, getting any of these creatures on your respective map makes you pretty much impossible to kill. This is because you're able to evade basically every single threat on the map. If you pair these strong early game mobility options with good gear, you can easily go to the late game stuff and get better late game creatures really fast in progression. And once you do that, you're basically immortal to anything in PvE. Speaking of being fully kitted, there are a couple of things that you should have on your kit at all times. Having items like parachutes, bolas, grapples, food, water, ammo, repaired armor, and a spyglass are important even if you have a strong mount because you always want to prepare for the worst. There's a ton of variables in this game that you need to prepare for like Thylas, Capros, Perlovias, and Microraptors because they can all dismount you. And you also want to be ready for stuff like crashing when you're on a flyer, accidentally pressing E when you're flying around and dismounting, or just dismounting to go do something and then having a random Rex run at you. If you have all these items, you pretty much always have a tool to get out of any situation. Out of all the ones I explained, obviously parachutes are good to prevent fall damage. Bolas are good to stop smaller and faster threats that are attacking you. Grapples are really good just to get to elevation if you're getting attacked. Grapples are also good if you accidentally dismount, so then you can grapple back to your creature. Food, water, ammo, and armor are all self-explanatory, and the spyglass is really important if you crash, because if you crash and then you go to the ground and your flyer is high in the air, using the spyglass and then whistling down your creature gives you a much farther whistle range, which is super important if you fall really far to the ground, because then you can still reach your flyer. A lot of the time when you crash, you'll go to the ground, you'll look up, and you'll be like, damn, I can't reach my flyer with the whistle. Now I'm stranded out in the middle of the Ark world and I have no creature to go with. Having the spyglass more than doubles your whistle range, which means you're pretty much always going to be able to reach the flyer that you fell off of. The only other thing you always want to have on you is a melee weapon, because if you get jumped by something like a Thyla or a Capro, they will get crushed with a sword pretty quickly. All this stuff is really easy to bring around with you, and it's all pretty obvious why you would need it. Just make sure you actually have all this stuff on you when you're traveling around, and you're pretty much never going to get screwed when you're playing the game. Speaking of getting screwed over, dying of fall damage is really obnoxious, but luckily there are basically a million ways to prevent dying of fall damage in Ark, to the point where it's basically impossible to do so after about 20 minutes into a playthrough. Besides the obvious solution of just having parachutes on you, there's many other ways you can avoid fall damage too. Firstly, and most importantly, if you're on a tame and falling, just dismount the tame right before you hit the floor to prevent any fall damage from you and your tame. You can also use a glider suit or even a well-timed grappling hook for most situations when you're falling. If you're unconscious and falling, you won't take fall damage. If you're in a single player world and you're about to hit the ground, just disconnect and then reconnect and you won't take fall damage. Fall damage also has a hard cap of 430 damage, so if you're at 440 or higher, you'll never die of fall damage if you're at full HP. And if you're at 470 HP, you'll never die or have broken bones when you land, so you'll be able to run away from threats on the ground if there are any. Another funny one, which is not really helpful because you have to be falling straight down for this, but if you're in third person, you could even just look straight down and shoot a flare before you hit the ground to mitigate fall damage. There's just so many ways to do this in pretty much any situation you could possibly find yourself in, so hopefully you're not going to die of fall damage ever again. There are certain commands that you can also use in Ark to make your experience a lot easier, to make your game run a lot better, and to improve your survivability. First of all, the gamma command. People talk about it like it's cheating all the time. It's not. It's in the game for a reason, and it changes your brightness on a scale of 1 to 5, depending on how bright you need your game to be. Generally speaking, the brighter you make the game, the easier it is to see things around you, and the easier it is to deal with a lot of threats, especially during the dark nights. There's also r.fog_0, which turns off fog in your game. This is mainly helpful for performance, but it's also really helpful underwater because it makes things so much easier to see and prepare for. Another really nice performance one is r.volumetric cloud_0. This turns off clouds and a bit of the fog they added after the UE 5.5 update, and it makes the game look better and run a lot better. r.shadow_quality_0 also can turn off your shadows. If you want to turn them back on, you can do r.shadow_quality_1, but this makes things a lot easier to see too. And grass.size_scale_0 turns off all the ground clutter, which makes the game run so much better, especially on maps like Extinction where there's just way too much of this. Also, if you're playing PvP, there's two things you can do. One is you could use an INI configuration to change a lot of how your game looks and performs before you even log into the game. Or you could just go on the new performance setting they added with the UE 5.5 update. This setting basically minimizes every graphic that's not super important, and it boosts your performance and your FPS insanely well, and it also makes your visibility a lot better when you're playing the game, so you can actually see your enemies when you're attacking them. This is a worse version of INI, but it is still really, really good compared to just normal settings. With all that really important land stuff out of the way, let's talk about water for a bit. First of all, if you're underwater and your scuba tank's about to break, take it off. This might sound unintuitive because you'll start drowning, but the way scuba tanks work is they only use durability when they're on your back. So if you take it off and put it back on whenever your oxygen is actually at 0 and you're taking health damage, then your scuba tank will last much longer. This is obviously only relevant if you don't bring backup scuba tanks, which I highly recommend, but it is a really nice way to boost how much time scuba tanks last for. On primitive durability, a scuba tank will last you 30 minutes underwater, and it only takes a few seconds to fill your oxygen bar up every time you put it on. So if your scuba tank is down to about 1/4 durability, which means there's about 7 to 8 minutes left on it, you'll be able to last at least 30 minutes if you just take it off whenever you're full on oxygen, let your oxygen go down, and then put it back on when you're actually dying from the oxygen. This is obviously kind of tedious because you have to go in and out of your inventory super often, but it's much better than drowning. Also, always have flippers on you when you're underwater, just in case you get, for example, stunned or something like that happens. You want to be able to swim away as quick as possible. You can't outswim the electric eels with flippers, but you can outswim stuff like megalodons with them, so it is super helpful. And even with stuff like eels that you can't outswim, being faster does mean you get away a lot more of the time. Another tip for underwater is literally only ever riding on basilos, archelons, or tuzos if you're going deep underwater. If you're on the surface or you're just trying to tame something like a megalodon, you really don't need any of these because it's pretty overkill. The only stunning creature in this area of the water is the jellyfish, and they're very easy to see if fog is off. But if you're going deep underwater, for example, for a cave or for loot drops, or even just going down there to farm certain resources, you should be on one of these. Or if you're on a Dunkleosteus to farm, you should have a pack of creatures around you that can kill those stunning creatures. Generally speaking, the best pack creatures to bring down here are Zipactinus or Megalodons. They actually get a pack buff, they're fast, they're small enough to go around in packs, and they do a lot of damage so they can kill the eels really quick. The alternative to using stun immune creatures is using really fast stuff like the dolphin, which can work if you're trying to get drops really fast in the early game. Just yet again, make sure to have the fog off and be very aware of your surroundings because these eels are pretty quick and they definitely will kill you if they get you. My last water-related tip is how to deal with elite sickness, which is a very common way of dying in the early game if you're trying to move around on a raft. When using a raft, stay near the shore and use orbital camera so you can have vision of what's going on under you in the water, and use the r.fogspace0 command so you can see in the water and there's no fog. If you do these two things, you're going to be able to easily spot whales before they get to you. Now, whenever you see a whale, just get back to the shore as soon as you physically can. You basically need to get back to shore so it can't get to you because it's too big to hit you when you're on shore, because if it hits you a few times, your day is over. It's also worth noting that rafts cannot outspeed any form of whale. The normal or the alpha whale will both easily outspeed you when you're on a raft. If you're on a motorboat, you're in much less danger because you're more durable and you're way faster, so you don't need to be as alert at all times. The motorboat is 30% faster than the raft, so you're able to outswim normal leads. The alpha leads are still faster than you, but they're not way faster than you, so you can still get back to shore in time if they start hitting you. If you're leaving your raft or motorboat in PvE to go do something, either leave it on the shore somewhere or leave aggressive underwater tames around your raft to protect it. Leads really aren't that strong, so if you have a couple of decent megalodons, they should crush it. Or any stronger underwater tame, of course. In PvP, hide the raft as far away from the mainland as possible for it to be harder to find, and use auto turrets if you can afford them because that's the highest tier turret you can place on a raft, and it's a lot better than nothing in terms of defense. If you're in single player, it'll just go out of render and it'll be safe regardless because leads will not spawn in and attack your raft out of a render distance. So these defense tips are really specifically for online environments. Rafts are really high upside in the early game because they let you move around, but they are high risk because if it does die, all your stuff's falling to the bottom of the ocean, so just make sure to be safe. Alright, moving away from the water now, let's talk about taming creatures. When you're trying to tame anything in Ark that can't be hit with Ebola, you want to use a trap. Traps not only make the process safer for you, but they also make it safer for the tame you're trying to get, because the creature will be encased in a trap instead of running around the dangerous world of Ark while you're tranking it out. On screen now you can see the two most universally useful traps in Ark for knockout tames. This will work on about 98% of creatures in the game that are knockouts. There are exceptions to every rule like the Giga, but most tames can be done really easily with one of these two, and using these traps is consistent, easier than looking up 100 different niche trap setups for every time you're trying to tame something new, and they'll keep you safe during your knockout process way more often. The great thing about these traps too is even if you mess up when you're taming these, you can always use the traps to evade danger yourself. Let's say for example you piss off a megalo and mess up trapping it, just go inside the trap and it'll make sure that the megalo can't reach you and kill you for making that mistake. If you, for example, use Ebola instead of using a trap, make sure to put spikes around your creature because you want to keep your creature safe when it's knocked out from the dangerous world of Ark, just like I was mentioning earlier, and the trap would do that for you, but yet again, if you don't use one, spikes are cheaper. At number 11, I have using Gilly and Cactus Broth more often than you already are. I want to make something clear before I explain this. This only applies to PvE. If you're in a PvP server, do not wear Gilly. You're going to get crushed if somebody sees you. Both Gilly and Cactus Broth serve similar purposes in the game, and it basically makes you much harder to see for enemy creatures. You've probably used it in the past for passive taming, but in my opinion, using Gilly armor is pretty convenient for when you're just going around the map doing other tasks. As long as you're not in a really cold environment, it makes gameplay consistently a little bit less annoying. Stuff like Microraptors won't bother you as much. Situations where you're dismounting to go farm something or try to knock something out are going to be much easier because you're getting aggroed a lot less, and it's just generally a really useful thing to have on in PvE. Yet again, in PvP, wear flak. You're going to die really quickly in Gilly because the downside for Gilly compared to flak is it has way less armor and less durability. But yeah, definitely try it out. I think it's pretty convenient, and I've personally had a lot more fun playing Ark in PvE when I wear Gilly for like 80% of the time I'm in the game. My second and last tip will cover how to be prepared for caves. Here's everything you need to bring in a standard caving kit for basically every cave in the game. 2 sets of flak. The backup is important because Arthros can destroy your armor really quickly. Other sets of armor for extreme weather can be good, but I'd always recommend using flak or riot because they're simply stronger than armor sets like fur or Gilly. Bring a melee weapon of some sort to dispose of weak enemies. Always bring a crossbow with grapples because grapples can get you out of pretty much any pinch in a cave. They help you avoid threats like creatures, help you avoid obstacles like parkour. You'll basically always have a use for a grapple in a cave. Bring plenty of food and water, obviously, and most importantly, bring a ton of sleeping bags. The reason you want these sleeping bags is because if you died during the cave, the sleeping bag will act as a checkpoint and you can respawn very close to where you died to get your stuff back. If you instead die and then go back to your base, get your second best set of gear and your second best caving creature to go back and get your old stuff, you may not get back in time before the stuff despawns, and it also might be too difficult to get back because you have weaker stuff and you already died with the stronger stuff. Otters are also excellent shoulder mats for basically every cave because it gives you bonus insulation, as well as its ability to hold multiple artifacts, which is incredibly useful. I also highly recommend a strong caving mount for most caves. If it's a crouch cave, you can probably run it on foot, but for other caves, definitely bring a mount. On the top right of the screen now, you can see a list for my top 20 favorite caving creatures in the game. If you want to check that video out, I do recommend it if you're trying to figure out what caving creatures are good for you. There's also secondary items that can be helpful to bring for specific caves. For example, rare flowers if you're riding through a cave with Perlovias, antidotes if you're riding through a cave with bats, cactus broth if you want to run through a cave and get ignored by a lot of stuff, and custom foods to manage extreme temperatures like Freya curry or Kalian soup, or just Shadow Steak Sauté because it gives you both hypo and hyperthermic insulation. If you have all this gear on you and you understand what threats are inside the cave before you go in, you're pretty much good for every cave that doesn't consist of a puzzle. And if you're in a cave with a puzzle, look up a guide, don't bother, it's going to take you 7 hours. If you try to figure out the Life's Labyrinth cave by yourself, you're going to waste at least an hour trying to do it, and it's really not fun at all. And last but not least, we have bosses. Bosses are the toughest objective by a pretty decent margin in the entirety of the PvE side of Ark, and they're inherently high risk because if you die in them, all your tames and your best gear is gone forever. Crashing is incredibly frustrating during these fights and while you're loading into the fights because you lose all your tames and your gear without even being able to put up a fight. Luckily, there are some ways to prevent crashes during boss fights. Firstly, disable foliage interaction in your settings. This reduces crashing heavily when loading into boss arenas and barely impacts your gameplay at all. Lowering graphic settings in general won't help in this case because the crashes are engine related because you're loading into the boss fight while you crash, but lowering graphic settings could slightly help if you're crashing during the boss fight itself. Before you start a boss, you also want to make sure that you have the interface transition animation setting disabled in your game. I highly recommend turning the setting off in general because it reduces the chance of you crashing when you're loading into any map, loading into a boss arena, or loading into a cave. If you crash even semi-consistently during a playthrough leading up to the boss fight, you should also verify the integrity of your game files in Steam before you load into the boss fight. This will just make sure nothing is wrong and there's no reason besides Ark being Ark that you're crashing. The other frustrating way you can lose a fight, even if you are strong enough to beat it, is by dying off the back of your mount during the fight. If you die off the back of your mount, it doesn't matter how strong your 20 creatures are, even if they're wrecking the boss, because the fight will end on the spot, and your gear and boss fighting dinos will be gone. To prevent dying while you're on your mount, just stay back on a Uranus or a Daedon during the fight, and make sure your army has higher drag weight than the creature you're riding on. This is because bosses target the highest drag weight creatures, so you can ensure it ignores you during the fight, and you're much safer. There's plenty more to learn about this topic, but I already made a huge hour and 20 minute long guide covering every single boss fight in the game in detail. So if you want to learn more about a particular boss fight or bosses in general, click the video linked on screen now to go check it out. Thank you to all my members for making these videos possible. I hope you found this video useful, and I know you'll find the next one useful. See you there. Peace.